time. It's one of the greatest commodities.
Welcome to the Living Superfood Show. My name is Umoya, and I'm here with my co-host, the one and only Master Chef, Health and Food Scientist, Kidi Awadu. How you doing today, Kidi?
We black and we shine. It's a beautiful day, a beautiful year, a beautiful season, a beautiful life. We're going to have a beautiful conversation.
Oh yeah, we are. So the topic today is food racist? So the first question that I have for you, Kidi, is what's the definition of food?
That's a really profound and simple question. Food is, of course, complex. On one hand, food supplies the basic building blocks of life, and it encompasses a whole spectrum, a vast spectrum of raw materials which are necessary for the body to construct and essentially construct proteins from the foods, from the amino acids that are gathered from the foods, and other complementary compounds that are needed to sustain life, such as hormones, etc. And then beyond that, food is essentially cultural. So food is not only the building blocks of life, but food is a way that we build the family and community through culture.
So the next question I have, Kidi, is what is racism?
Racism. I wrote a book published in 1997 called Moving Beyond Race-Ism. Ism is a suffix that means doctrine. And doctrine, in this particular case, the doctrine based upon a notion of genetic nationalism, that your genes make you a part of a nationalist group. But one of the key findings in the book, and again, the subtitle of the book, New Strategies for a New Millennium, one of our key strategies in moving beyond racism was to understand the value of culture as opposed to using race as a sort of a caste-based hierarchical system. And in identifying what is racism, we talked about caste-based hierarchy. And these 6 castes that we talk about in the book, of course, racism really has to do not so much with race or color, but colorism. Because even within distinct ethnicities, such as Chinese people or Koreans or Filipinos, we can still find a hierarchy within a culture based upon your color, meaning the darker skinned you are, the more likely you're a field worker, an agricultural worker, which many of them regard to be kind of a low form of employment in the culture. So it's real critical that we understand that racism is an oversimplification of a system called caste-based hierarchy, which includes 6 key factors, including colorism, but also gender, men being preferred over women in many situations, wealth, education or education level, height or physical appearance, and religion. All of these are used to kind of place people in certain hierarchies by which they might be included or excluded in various caste outcomes.
Okay. Just to elaborate on what you're saying as well, if anybody wants to look up Johan Frederic Blumenbach, obviously his so-called ideology has been debunked, but if anyone has a chance, if you're listening to this, he was the one who termed the coin or the racial anthropologist. So definitely, if anybody wants to look into that origin, you could definitely look at that too. But definitely, Key, thank you for that term.
Modern day concepts of race really emerged from, I think it's probably about an 18th century group of French and German scientists or pseudo-scientists, and in attempting to preserve their belief in their own superiority, they've engaged all of these different measurements by which they determined what human races there are, and of course putting themselves at the top of that hierarchy. So good point that you make. We really need to go back and take a historical analysis of these concepts beyond race and ask the question, maybe they need to be thrown in the garbage can of pseudoscience, junk science, until we can move forward with better understanding.
Definitely. So the next question I have for you, Keith, is can you please explain biochemistry and what is food's role in that process, if any?
Sure. How many hours did you say we have for our conversation this evening?
I know, right?
Because biochemistry is a wonderfully complex spectrum of different sciences that all come together. And when we talk about how does food relate to biochemistry, very, very tight and important connection there. I'm going to simplify this just as much as I possibly can. Biochemistry is, of course, one of the branches of science, of biology, that explores the chemical processes that are related to living organisms. And human body is incredibly complex biochemical manufacturing plant. It's a laboratory-based science, meaning in vivo and in vitro studies are very important, meaning studies in the body or studies in the test tube environment. And it brings together biology and chemistry into one science, biochemistry. So by using chemical knowledge and techniques, and my father himself was an industrial chemist, so I grew up around a lot of that. And then when I graduated high school, I went into a biological research laboratory. So I have a very profound background in biochemistry. So by using chemical knowledge and biological techniques, we can understand and we can take a look at the big pictures insofar as biological problems, biological systems. Now, how does this relate to food? Quite simply, food is a pathway by which the vast majority of biochemical inputs actually enter our bodies. The only other pathway by which these biochemical inputs into our body is oxygen that comes through the process of breathing. But oxygen, very, very important part of our biochemistry. Good question. I hope that was a simple enough answer.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. So the next question is, have there been any studies of biochemistry based on race? If so, should those studies be ignored and should scientists just focus on generalities?
I don't think these studies should be ignored. Even in the mistakes that they would made, there are lessons to be learned there. And I'm of the mindset that even if we're studying bad science, we can still learn much that can be useful as we develop good science. So yes, there have been significant numbers of studies of biochemistry and racial factors as opposed to physical markers and race, which of course, as we talked about earlier, kind of used to create this caste-based hierarchy. One of the critical areas we can look to see this is in blood typing and what's called the RH factor, which relates to blood types. And the research out there is pretty clear that when it comes to blood typing, blacks have a higher proportion of the O and B blood types and a much lower proportion of A and AB blood types than do white people. So again, when we're talking about ethnicity or what are called racial or phenotypical differences and distinctions, it's not always a measure between black and white, even though we would kind of see those colors and presume the exact opposites. In actuality, there's much more overlap based upon geographical location, especially geographical location over an extended time period, which gives us the distinctions that are these phenotypical distinctions that are commonly referred to as racial types. So yes, there have been studies, and these studies I think are very important, especially when it comes to compatibility with certain food types, realizing that we evolved over the course of millions of years to determine these distinct phenological types, different, color, nose, hair texture, and a number of other things, bone density among them. But that we evolved in areas where the foods and the plants, these complementary fauna and flora, evolved around us as well. And so that we have a symbiotic relationship with different types of foods based upon these geographical isolations.
Okay, great answer. Which actually leads to my next question. You may have even answered it, but if you want to elaborate on what I'm about to ask, please do so. It's going to be kind of long-winded because I have to put this in some kind of context. But here we go. Some scientists
Hmm.
believe in the theory that the original Homo sapiens sapiens migrated out of Africa and then populated the world. As the migration happened, so did the human gene, as well as physical traits, as you mentioned, Keity, hair, nose, skin, coloration, etc. Now that human beings of all different phenotypes have populated pretty much of all parts of the earth, are there certain foods that are better suited for different so called races, i.e., sub Saharan African, European, Mesoamerican, Asian, Pacific Islander, etc., that we can consume? And is it made for all human beings, regardless of ethnicity or race? Like, so for example, let me just give you an example. So, if the majority of a person's genetic makeup is of European descent, are there like food types that are basically suited for Europeans, sub Saharan Africans, etc.?
Hmm. It's a very good question, and as your question belies, it's a complicated situation. Really, we could spend an entire semester breaking that question down into its various components. So let me just kind of put it all together that, yes, this idea that Homo sapiens sapiens, meaning thinking man, Homo meaning a distinct uh, species or distinct group from other groups, did begin in the African continent. There was also Neanderthal, which did not evolve in Africa. There was supposedly another species of humans, Cro-Magnon man. There are traces of Neanderthal that still do exist, but essentially Neanderthal was bred out, and Homo sapiens sapiens became the dominant human species on the planet. Even those people claim they can find traces of Neanderthal in about 6 different population groups around the planet, mainly evolving from Europeans and European migration, which was, of course, much later than the African migration. The oldest African migration patterns we can see range between, say, 60,000 years when Africans migrated into South Asia and from there distributed across the Pacific Islands, as well as migration to the Western Hemisphere. The original African migration to the Western Hemisphere is now being dated somewhere between as early as 30,000 years ago and more likely closer to 100,000 years ago. The Asian migration to the Western Hemisphere across the Bering Strait from Mongolia and Russia didn't occur until as early or as late as 12,000 or so years ago. So these migration patterns are very important. And when we talk about the length of time that these migrations took place and the length of time it takes for measurable evolution of human physiology to take place, it's said that the most recent part of human evolution is the growth of a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain where advanced thinking, calculation takes place. Essentially, delayed gratification takes place. If I make this decision now, how will it benefit me down the road? Whereas with most other animal species, they don't calculate that far ahead. If the dog sees the food, the dog going to eat up as much of the food as it possibly can, not thinking that if I save some of the food, I and my dog family can eat for a longer period of time. So when we look at these evolutionary periods, if it's taken 10,000 years for the prefrontal cortex to evolve, and that humans have migrated around the planet for as much as 100,000 years, then yes, we would be able to clearly point to serious modifications of our body, our phenotype. Now, there was a period of there was more than one period, but the latest period of what is called the Pleistocene, the Wormian period, where many who migrated to northern climates got trapped behind the ice age and essentially got locked into that environment for 30,000 years. And so in that environment where you would not have access to fresh grown fruits and vegetables for several months of the year, they therefore began to evolve to be able to consume things like milk and cheese and much more animal flesh as opposed to the fresh fruits, nuts, berries, and leaves, root crops that we would be getting in more temperate equatorial parts of the planet. So if it's a yes or no answer, yes, the migration had powerful influence on the distinction of the different phenotypes of people around the planet. And with those physiological distinctions, you would definitely be reasonable to make the assumption that their food evolved along with them.
Wonderful, wonderful answer. All right, so the next question I have is there any validity in that the darker the fruit or vegetable, the more rich in vitamins it contains?
Oh, yeah. What they say, the darker the berry, the
Sweeter the juice.
The darker the sister, the sweeter the dance. But yes, it's very, very important that the different colors of foodstuffs is taken into account. And there is a thing called plant melanin. And we do know, if we're looking at melanin, what is melanin? An irregular light-absorbing polymer. And it contains different components derived from the oxidization of tyrosine. And, you know, tyrosine is an amino acid. Amino acids are the very building blocks of life that are extracted from proteins in the food that we eat. And the body makes tyrosine from other amino acids as well. Tyrosine can be found in a bunch of different food products, including animal-based products. It is one of the essential amino acids. So when we're talking about the color of foods, it's very, very clear that there is correlation between the colors and the depth of colors in foods and the spectrum of minerals and vitamins as to be found in them. So therefore, I mean, you have the different colors of foods. You have white foods, which have their specific values. Here, let me just give you a little example of some of the notes that I have put together on this. You have purple and blue foods, such as kale, has very, very dark leaves. Well, of all of the greens that are a great source of chlorophyll and magnesium, critical for our immune strength and health, kale is considered to be the most powerful, and kale has the richest, darkest color. Other vegetables in that group would be eggplant. You got purple cauliflower, asparagus, and others. Purple potatoes are much healthier than the white potatoes. You have the green, which is the chlorophyll. Absolutely vital and necessary for maintenance of strong immune system and health. The magnesium in the chlorophyll to be found. Orange-colored fruits and vegetables, such as sweet potatoes, carrots, yellow and orange peppers, pumpkins, cantaloupe. Orange contains beta-carotene, from which our body synthesizes certain vitamins, and they also contain large amounts of vitamins C, B vitamins, calcium, iron, and of course potassium. Potassium along with magnesium and calcium. These are some of the 8 major minerals that we need to get from our food in order for our body to be healthy, the structural parts of our body to be healthy. Red contains not only the lycopene in tomatoes, but also red is a good, strong indicator of iron in the food. And iron is such a vital component for healthy blood platelet function and creation in our bodies. Blood platelets carry the nutrients as well as carry oxygen through the blood to every cell in the body. So the colors of the food are absolutely good, and despite what some people say, even white or very light green colors in foods are indicators of some very healthy compounds, flavonoids such as quercetin, camphorol, which is a very strong antioxidant, other components, anthocyanins, these are another form of antioxidant foods. So even light-colored foods such as parsnips and different root crops could be very, very healthy. Look at cauliflower. Cauliflower, in most cases, is very light-colored food, but is a powerful source of sulforaphane, which is an important part of the immune system for preventing cancer and other critical compounds. Yes, colors in foods indicate the depth, richness, and a concentration of different minerals and vitamins, and that's what keeps us healthy.
All right. To kind of summarize that, what you're saying. So if a person has a white onion, a yellow onion, or a red onion, there's vitamins in each type of onion that's beneficial for a person.
Absolutely.
So the next question, Keity, that I have is there any validity that certain races tolerate dairy better than others, or is it just an individual's tolerance regardless of race?
That's a wonderful, wonderful question, and it's kind of a complex answer. Again, we talk about the evolution of the various phenotypes of people geographically isolated over long periods of time. And the role of the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, entrapping European people behind there to where they evolved to be able to consume much more animal milk, whereas the other people from other parts of the planet, generally by the age of about 36 months, most of the planet's inhabitants, especially South Asians and Africans, lose the ability to create the enzyme called lactase. And lactase is an enzyme that breaks down the sugar molecule to be found in milk, lactose. So therefore, you find many more people of darker color. South Asians, Filipinos are probably the least lactose tolerant people on the planet, followed by Africans. But even though Africans are generally 95% lactose intolerant, you do find a couple of groups inside of Africa, the pastoralists of Eastern Africa, who evolved their societies over the course of tens of thousands of years to where they raise animals and they consume the blood and the raw milk from those animals. And it was a fundamental part of their lifestyle support, of their nutrition support, very fundamental part of it. And so these things, they do tend to be geographically isolated, but the general rule is after 36 months, the overwhelming majority of people on this planet become lactose intolerant because they're no longer producing the lactase enzyme to break these sugar molecules down into constituent proteins and amino acids to be able to consume them. While you will find that European people, the lighter the skin, the more lactose tolerant they are well into their adult years, and you can even find them as grown adults producing the lactase enzyme, which allows them to process milk. But generally, as a rule, especially the way that milk is produced in the factory farming situations these days, eliminating milk from the diet and all such dairy products is a good way of significantly lowering one's risks of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and a spectrum of other metabolic disorders and diseases. Milk causes inflammation, which is the body's immune reaction to what it regards to be as a hostile protein.
Okay, we're almost gonna wrap it up here. So I have one more question for you. Is there any science-based information that different ethnicities have different taste buds? So, for example, some ethnic groups may prefer salt more than others, which may lead to higher rates of diabetes.
And of course, it wouldn't be necessarily relating the salt to diabetes. The salt would be related to hypertension, high blood pressure.
Thanks for the
Sugar
clarification.
would be more correlated to diabetes. I don't know if I'm comfortable with the idea of saying that different ethnicities have different taste buds, because we realize that taste buds and our group preferences for different types of foods is strongly influenced and impacted by culture. And you can even take members of the same phenotypical or ethnic group, racial group, if you want to use that language, and if you put them into very distinct cultures from each other, then you're going to find that their dietary patterns are really quite distinct as well. The dietary patterns of long-living Russian Cossacks is going to be different from the dietary patterns of British people. You're going to find the dietary patterns of East African pastoralists who might drink raw blood and raw milk from the cattle that they raise is going to be very, very distinctive from the dietary patterns that you would find in the Caribbean, which has a wonderful richness of fruits and of culinary herbs and spices that gives them their orientation towards food, etc. So I would say, as opposed to looking at different taste bud patterns or cultural assumptions of what is and is not delicious food, we're definitely going to be looking more at cultural influence, which is, of course, a function of society, etc. I mean, you have a number of people of African heritage in the United States who do not like spicy foods. They want it sweet, they want it sugary, they do want it salty because, many times we were relegated to the most simplest of spices. But if you took these same foods that African Americans relish as soul food, and you take them to a place like West Africa, where they have such a density of rich spices in their culinary patterns, Ethiopia, etc., they would look at the food that we're eating and they would turn their nose up and say, how in the world could you tolerate this stuff? And African Americans, many of them, just because of the cultural influence, turn their nose up at some of the most highly valued African culinary arts in the world. Ethiopian food is considered by all culinary specialists to be some of the finest tasting food in the world. But many African Americans really just kind of refuse to taste it.
Okay. Well, it looks like we're pretty much out of time here. So before we log off here, is there anything else you would like to say?
I will say that food is nature's most perfect medicine, as we are still, as a nation, as a planet, suffering through this declared pandemic called COVID. I remind people that nature gave us all we needed to keep our immune system strong and highly functioning well into advanced senior years. And we can take advantage of that, but we got to be smart. And that's why people listening to this series, I think, are exhibiting their profound willpower to be as smart as possible in all of this. And when it comes to food as nature's most powerful medicine, it is also the medicine that can cure the mental illnesses that we associate with racism.
Sounds like a wonderful solution to me, Brother Kitty. So as always, appreciate you. And thanks everyone for listening. This is the Living Superfruit Show. And until next time, take care.